Hello and welcome to the 5th episode of the Unsigned Manager podcast, where I, Siji Kolawole, break down football's key topics and headlines each week. Today's episode tries to find the hardest jobs for a sporting director to take in the Premier League, so let's get into the episode. Okay, so let's start with this simple question. What is a sporting director? Now, this is a position in football which comes in many different names, many different forms. Sporting director, director of football, technical director, head of football operations, but generally it means the same thing. It's a position between the manager and the owner, and it's a European idea which has been adapted by English clubs lately. So this person will oversee the entire football philosophy of the club, making sure that their ideas are spread through the youth academy and into the first team. A sporting director is a manager's boss. Managers are hired by directors to keep the philosophy going throughout the club, so that every time a manager gets sacked, the entire philosophy of the club doesn't change. So take for example Manchester City or Barcelona. They will look to play the same style of football regardless of who's manager. Barcelona have been trying to play Johan Cruyff football ever since he was at the club, and this is 30-40 years on now. The aim is to keep the same philosophy throughout the time. This role also has a big involvement in player and staff recruitment. Sporting directors will be really involved in negotiating, signing players, signing staff to help with the manager, hiring managers, lots of stuff. A good sporting director will have amazing recruitment of players and staff. They will identify players that will really benefit the first team of that club. I'm going to go back to Manchester City as an example because they're one of the best, if not the best, to do it. Players like Ruben Dias, Aymeric Laporte, Kevin De Bruyne will be analysed and scouted, and a sporting director will be one of the last people to make a decision on them. So finding someone like a Bernardo Silva will be difficult for most clubs to do, but a good sporting director will be able to find the players that can really benefit his first team. They'll also have a strong football philosophy because this needs to carry out throughout the entire club. So a director who is a bit weak and a bit and ahhing of his philosophy won't give the same effect as someone who knows exactly what they want from every manager and every coaching staff member at the club. Good sporting director will also have good leadership and good management skills. They're going to be in charge of a lot of people, making a lot of decisions. They need to know exactly what they're doing there. And they'll create the right environment for development between the manager and players. There isn't anything worse. Think about your normal life. There isn't anything worse than going to a job and having no idea how your manager is going to be that day. And you're not sure whether to be on eggshells, whether you can be a little bit more casual. A sporting director will set that environment that everyone can follow through. You know exactly what you're getting every day, and you can be comfortable within that. And a big task of theirs will be negotiating player contracts and the balance between the best interests of the player and the best interests of the club. Again, for example, Manchester City. Currently, Fernandinho is looking for a 2-year deal, but Fernandinho is 36 years old. The sporting director doesn't really want to give him 2 years, just wants to give him 1. Dino wants 2, so between the two of them, they'll work that out. So the director will be looking at the best interest for a player who's long served the club, and for the club who doesn't want to guarantee that much money to an older player. So for a sporting director, it's key for them to have a few specific things to work well. They need to have good owners. They need to have owners who are willing to give them a little bit of autonomy to make decisions. If they feel hamstrung or owners are disagreeing with them at every turn, it just makes things not run smoothly. And the more grit there is in that engine, the less likely the team will be able to succeed. They need resources, and this is a big problem for most clubs now. Especially after the COVID season, sporting directors need a little bit of money, not just for transfers, but to redevelop infrastructure, to support some of the coaching sessions of academy staff, to help with travel and this and that and contracts. You need a little bit of resources. Working on a shoestring budget is just going to be hard for any sporting director. They need a good squad of players to use, especially one that isn't too old. It would be really hard for a sporting director to build a long-lasting dynasty at a club with a squad that is a bit too old or the quality isn't right there. It just adds a lot more extra work for them. Probably the most important, they need to have a good relationship with the manager. Without that, this whole thing falls apart. A sporting director and a manager at odds just isn't going to work out. We've seen it at Lyon recently, currently with PSG and Poch. We're not really sure how good the relationship is between your sporting director and your manager, and without that, you fracture the club. Because the owner's going to pick a side, the players will probably pick a side, and you just ruining the cohesiveness that you need to be a successful football club. So, in this episode, I've taken a look at 20 Premier League clubs, and I want to try and find which of the sporting director jobs are the hardest for a random template director to walk into. If everyone quit their sporting director job today, I want to see which would be the hardest job for someone to walk into. But before that, I just want to delve into a little bit of background onto the effect a sporting director can have on a club. So, starting in Italy, Giuseppe Marotta is widely regarded as one of the best in this role in the world. After being general manager to a few Serie B sides in the 1990s, Marotta took sporting control of a Sampdoria side who were coming off the worst league finish in the club's 40-year history, finishing 10th in Serie B in 2001-2002. Looking at the situation the club was in, Marotta signed experienced Serie A players, young promising talents, and with a new manager, Sampdoria leapt from 10th to 2nd, earning their way back into Serie A. Their first season was successful, as Marotta continued to build on the squad by signing Cristiano Doni and Francesco Antonioli, leading Sampdoria to 6th in their debut season in Serie A. And after a few more years at the club, Marotta was recruited by Juventus in 2010 to help rebuild the squad after their disappointing 7th place finish in the league the last year. Marotta's excellent recruitment was immediately evident in Turin, revamping the squad by signing 14 new players whilst offloading 11. And for the start of the 11-12 season, Marotta signed manager Antonio Conte to the club, publicly aiming for the club to win a Scudetto or qualify for the Champions League that season. And with recruiting Andrea Pirlo, Stefan Lichtsteiner, Arturo Vidal and others to the team, Juventus won their first title in 6 years. And do you remember that incredible Juve midfield in the mid-2010s? Guess who was responsible? Marotta put together a midfield of Paul Pogba, Andrea Pirlo, Arturo Vidal and Claudio Marchisio for a combined 10.5 million euros. That's the kind of difference a top sporting director can make to a club. That level of talent for so cheap helped Juve dominate Italian football for a decade and make 2 Champions League finals in the process. Marotta recently left Juventus for Inter Milan, bringing Inter a host of top players and winning this season's Scudetto, whilst finishing runner-up last year and making a Europa League final. And there's other top examples of sporting directors in Europe as well. Ever heard of Luis Campos? If you don't know his name, maybe you'll remember him as the guy who put together the foundations of that destructive Monaco team, which burst onto the scene by finishing 3rd in Ligue 1, then winning the league and reaching the Champions League semi-final. Although Campos left the club in 2015, the year they finished 3rd, the Ligue 1 winning side of 2016-17 was based off his foundations in recruiting promising talents and hiring a player development oriented manager to nurture that talent. In his 2-year stint at the club, Campos signed João Moutinho, James Rodriguez, Radamel Falcao, Fabinho, Anthony Martial, Bernardo Silva, Timothy Bakayoko, Jeffrey Kondogbia and Thomas Lemar, as well as supporting the development of Kylian Mbappe through the Monaco Academy. Campos then moved on to Lille, the team that just shock won the league title. And here he was able to develop and then sell promising talents, using that money to reinvest in the title winning team of the season, such as Renato Sanchez, Jonathan David, Jonathan Okone, as well as understanding the importance an older, thought to be Finnish player like Jose Font could have on this team. At 35, he is their league winning captain, and people thought he was finished. Campos sold Gabriel to Arsenal for £23 million profit, Pepe for £63 million profit, and Victor Osimhen for £40 million profit, as well as recent starlet Boubakary Soumare leaving for Leicester for about £21 million. Other famous examples of sporting directors are Michael Zorc at Borussia Dortmund, Marcel Brands at Everton, Chiki Begiristain at Manchester City, and Ralf Rangnick at RB Leipzig. These are people who can mastermind and blueprint the success of a club by themselves. Given the right resources, the right autonomy, and enough time, some of these people can transform a club with terrible history into being serious competitors. So moving into the Premier League, to find the hardest jobs for a sporting director in England, I decided to eliminate the recently promoted teams because survival is a completely different job to thriving in the league. So it's not fair to include those jobs because they're so different from what a normal sporting director would have to do. So anyone who's been promoted since 1920 season is removed. So next, here are the clubs that I eliminated and the reasons for why. So Chelsea, Leicester, Liverpool, Manchester City, they all have a combination of a good manager, many financial resources, and a promising squad to work with. Being a sporting director at these kind of clubs is demanding, but they're working with so much more resources that it's not fair. The following clubs have maybe one or two of those criteria, either manager, resources, or promising squad. So Arsenal, Manchester United, Tottenham, Everton. They might be lacking in one or two of those areas, but still will cut above the rest of the league. It's difficult, but it's not as tough as it is for others. Next are the slightly less esteemed teams. They're likely to be good due to a good manager drawing more talent from the squad than there is, or maybe excellent recruiting balances out excessive spending. There's some talent and some resources there, but they just can't really match the resources of the top team, and their best players are probably taken by top teams. So that gets rid of West Ham, Wolves, and Southampton. So after excluding each of those teams, the Premier League clubs left are Brighton, Burnley, Crystal Palace, and Newcastle. So I want to profile each of these clubs to highlight the difficulty a brand new sporting director would have if they took that job. So let's start with Brighton. So Brighton were promoted back into the Premier League for the beginning of the 2017-18 season, and they've been in the league since. Over the last 4 years, they finished 15th, 17th, 15th, and 16th consecutively. Current manager is Englishman Graham Potter. He is a highly sought after manager, really, tactically innovative, who is trying to make the best of his limited squad. And he's young in terms of football, he's only 46, and he's been linked to recent top jobs at Premier League clubs like Everton and Tottenham, but as publicly stated, he's not looking to move away from his current job, so you can rest easy, Brighton fans. Potter favours a 3-back, mostly but not exclusively, alternating between a 3-4-1-2, a 3-4-2-1, and a 3-4-3. The key is that he's highly adaptable, meaning he's comfortable enough to change formation or style if needed. Brighton play aggressively through their fullbacks, who look to create attacks by staying wide and moving the ball forward. But they can also tuck inside and overload the midfield, and as their fullbacks are generally higher up the pitch, this means they can dominate the middle and build up play right through the centre of the park. Brighton's attackers are required to press high and be aggressive against opposition centre backs to win the ball back high up the pitch to get the team forward as much as possible. They've grossly underperformed this year, really struggling to finish chances to gain the points that their performances deserve. If you watch Brighton play and then see their points tally, you wouldn't think it was the same team. Expected goals is like the holy grail of football stats. It's become so in fashion lately and analysts love it to death. But basically it calculates the likelihood of goal being scored from a chance. So bigger chances like a one-on-one or a sweat across the box, or if the keeper's out, will have a bigger XG because it's more likely a team will score from that. Whereas shooting from long distances or through a crowd of players will have a lower XG because you're not likely to score from that. So analysts use XG to calculate who should have won that game by tallying up the XG points to say, okay, he should have scored that and he might have scored that. So, but they probably would have won 2-1. So you can use it to compare to see people's performances compared to their actual results. So based on the last Premier League season, Brighton limited their opposition's chances pretty well, and they created enough of their own that they should have finished 5th. They had enough XG to finish 5th, but in reality they finished 16th. So this tells us two things, and these two things are supported by the eye test when you watch them. Brighton don't give away too many easy chances, and you have to be pretty clinical to score against them. But the issue is that their finishing is just not good enough to score the chances they're creating, which is why they aren't picking up as many points as they should be. So taking a deeper look at the squads, on the outside, Brighton's squad isn't really in too much of a bad position. They've got the 6th youngest squad in the league. It's the 2nd largest, but it could probably do with getting rid of a couple fringe players. Do you only have 3 players over 30, which is amazing considering one is a goalkeeper, and Jose Izquierdo is the main first team that's being released this summer. Everyone else has been retained. The squad has had significant injuries this year, with regular starters like Tariq Lamptey and Solly March getting injured for long periods. Lamptey missed 27 games with a hamstring problem, and Solly March's ruptured ACL cost him 17 this season. The squad contains talented players, and they are players that other clubs are sniffing about. Ben White, who's just about 20 minutes ago been put into the Euro squad, is a really very promising defensive talent. He's only 23 years old and he's drawing attention from elite clubs in the Premier League, with Tottenham heavily rumoured to be interested. He's a technical ball-playing defender who can fill in at centre-back, right-back, and is comfortable playing in defensive midfield. His market value is said to be around £25 million, and I wouldn't be surprised if a few suitors are happy to pay that for him. He's not the tallest, only about 5'11", which is kind of small for a centre-back, but he makes that up with anticipation to get interception, and he's so comfortable moving the ball forward from the back. Tariq Lamptey is another highly promising defender at the club. He's even younger than Ben White. He's only 20 years old. He's currently worth about 16 million, but to me that's a little bit cheap because he's another promising attacking fullback, which is possibly the most important position in modern day football. He hasn't played many Premier League games, his breakout season being last year and then dealing with a serious injury this year. But his dribbling, attacking contribution and crossing have shown that he's more than talented. And actually it doesn't really stop there for Brighton, with Lewis Dunk, Neil Maupay, Leandro Trossard and Yves Bissouma all being really talented players. But that's all the good. They have an above average Premier League manager, a good squad at a promising age, and if they were able to find a competent finisher, they might be able to shoot up the table. The difficulty with being sporting director at Brighton is that their current squad of players are developing faster than the club, meaning they're highly likely to move on. When you're a club looking to progress, the hardest thing to do is maintain your players. Think back to when Leicester won the Premier League title. What happened after that? Kante was bought by Chelsea. Mahrez wanted out and was eventually left for Manchester City. Danny Drinkwater left the club. Vardy was heavily recruited by everyone, including Arsenal. A good promising team is hard to keep together when the club isn't flush with cash to keep players like a Wolves, or their project isn't regularly showing success which the players can buy into like a Leicester. Currently, if you're a top player at Brighton, you're weighing up staying at a promising but realistically unsuccessful side to show your skills, but also at the same time trying to time when to leave before the club gets relegated or other players leave and you're just not good enough to remain competitive. From 2019 till now, granted we are approaching a transfer window, Brighton have spent net £66 million, which is 12th of 23 teams which have been in the league in that period. And with Yves Bissouma under heavy interest from Arsenal, Ben White from Tottenham, if Lamptey can maintain his previous form after his injury, Lewis Dunk is 29, and interest from other clubs about Potter, it wouldn't be surprising if Brighton's core of players isn't there within 2 seasons, and that's if they don't get relegated. It may prove really difficult to rejuvenate this squad enough to maintain competitiveness without extensive spending or keeping their best talents, which might be hard, especially with Potter. Obviously Brighton need a few strikers or forwards to be effective in the final third, but they may as well start shopping for or developing replacement players for their key talents now, because if they leave and Potter goes, the club might be in serious trouble. So up next is Burnley, who have become a Premier League staple over the last few years under the guidance of manager Sean Dyche. He led the club back to the Premier League in the 2013-14 season, which is his first full season in charge. And even though the club was relegated, he brought them back up for the start of the 16-17 season after record-setting championship wins. And since then, Burnley have stayed in the Premier League, even though some seasons have been tougher than others. So going over their league finishes from the 2016-17 season onwards, Burnley have finished 16th, 7th, 15th, 10th and 17th in the Premier League. So they're a little bit inconsistent, sometimes finishing as high as 7th and being in Europe, but then being a relegation candidate last year. And led by manager Sean Dyche, who is likely to have signed or is signing a new contract by the time you've heard this, Burnley aren't one of the most attractive teams to watch in the league. If we're being honest, I doubt there's many neutral fans who are circling Burnley games on their calendar to go and see. Unless maybe you're a long ball specialist or you're very excited by second balls coming off crosses. They play incredibly directly, aiming to put their physical and aerially dominant striker Chris Wood in position to win headers and flick on to Vydra or Dwight McNeil to make chances. They generally stick to a 4-4-2, sometimes changing to a 4-4-1-1. The aim being to create a low block which is difficult to break down as teams have to pass 2 banks of 4. And rather than maintaining possession and building up attacks, Burnley would rather play longer, put pressure on the opposition centre-backs and try and physically dominate them. So as I said before, I like to use that eye test to see whether I like a team or a player. I watch them first and then I look at the stats afterwards to back up if they are following what I see, if you get me. So by my eye, Burnley don't really do either section of the pitch that well. They don't defend that great, they don't attack that well. And the numbers back this up. They're 17th in XG4. XG, remember that stat? How likely you are to score from the chances you create. And that makes sense because headers are less effective in XG than shots on the ground, and Burnley are basically all headers. They're 17th in XG against, which means that teams create good opportunities against Burnley. They've scored the 3rd lowest amount of goals in the league this year and conceded the 6th most goals in the season. They also are 11th for clean sheets, which is about average, but they just aren't good enough defensively to continue this guarded style. The fact that Chris Wood got 12 goals in this system is incredible, because after him the next highest goal scorers are Westwood, Barnes and Vydra, who all got 3. To comfortably remain in the division and get back to competing for Europe like they did when they finished 7th. This has to be the key area a sporting director will address. I think their play style is hampering the squad because they soak up so much pressure per game that it's not surprising that when they do concede, the floodgates open. And Manchester City are a good example of this. I like to use them as an example for a lot of things because they are probably the best run club right now in the world. And when you go away to the Etihad looking to soak up pressure, and good luck, because if they get one they'll go for more, just like they did when they battered Burnley 5-0 in December of 2020. They've got the 2nd oldest squad in the league, just 0.4 years younger than Crystal Palace. And of all of Burnley's most talented, effective players, their key players, only Dwight McNeil is under 28. Everyone else is at or past their prime, while he is so much younger than the rest of the squad. There's no real promising talent, there's no core of younger players coming up at the same time. It's just McNeil. And for me, any competent sporting director should have never allowed this lack of youth to get so far. Directors should be consistently working to ensure that there are young players breaking into the first team at all times. Sometimes that can be by necessity, sometimes that can be by design. Again, Manchester City, Liverpool, Phil Foden, Curtis Jones, when the key players start leaving that team, there's people that are going to come in and take the place, and they're blooding them in early now, so that Curtis Jones, Phil Foden, Nat Phillips, Nico Williams are ready to play when those older players start getting moved out. Sometimes it's by necessity, like with the Arsenal team. The team isn't great right now and it hurts me as an Arsenal fan, but between Saka, Smith Rowe, Martinelli, you've got a core of players there, Kieran Tierney, you've got a core of players there who will be in the squad for the next few years, taking over from the older players that are already there. Burnley just didn't do that. And they've got three, for me, real valuable players, Tarkowski, Pope and McNeil, but there should be a young core of players there. But James Tarkowski, I think he's a very good centre-back, and without him, I think Burnley's deep defensive block would be much less effective. He's everything Burnley want in a centre-back. If you could bottle up a Sean Dye centre-back, it'd probably be James Tarkowski. He's physical, he's dominant in the air, he likes to play long, his timing on blocking shots is good, everything Dyche needs. He's first for tackles, fourth for clearances and second for blocks for Burnley this year, whilst playing 36 games in the league, so he's available. He has to be an absolute untouchable for Burnley sporting director, and so does Nick Pope. Cemented himself as one of the best goalkeepers in the league this year, amazing short range shot stopper, and he's had a long run this season as having the most clean sheets in the league. I think Emi Martinez ended up winning that, but Pope was up there keeping pace with him for a while. It's sad that he wasn't able to go to the Euros because of his knee injury. I think that would have been a great experience for him. He probably would have played maybe 1 or 2 games and probably would have been the warm-up keeper that Sam Johnson was, but unfortunate. And the last valuable player has to be the guy I said before, Dwight McNeil. He is in that bracket of promising young players in the league. Not at the level of like a Trent or a Foden, but at 21, McNeil has lots of potential. And big clubs are definitely coming calling for him one day. Currently, Aston Villa are heavily rumoured to be interested, although I think that might be in doubt now after Buendia's signing. But Burnley would sorely miss him. He is one of their 2 wingers. The whole club has 2 wingers in it, and is possibly their most valuable player when you account for potential. He's averaging just under 3 dribbles a game, 1.3 key passes, and gets fouled over 1 time a game. His young age and big minutes mean he might be the future that Burnley look to build around. As I see it, they have 2 massive issues: squad age and transfer budget. Of the Burnley squad that just finished the 2020-21 season, only 4 players are under 23. And this includes players who are brought in on loan, players Burnley sent out on loan, players that were promoted from the academy into the first team. Burnley have 4 players under 23. So just for a little comparison, Wolves have 11, Arsenal have 8, even Brighton, who are around Burnley's level in the league, have 12 players under 23. If the academy is not going to develop players good enough for the first team, then the sporting director needs to revamp the scouting and coaching system, because no Premier League squad should get to this age without multiple young players coming in to replace first team players. It has to be done perpetually. Sir Alex Ferguson had the best philosophy on this, I think, which is that you should be looking to bring in 1 or 2 players from the academy every season, because it keeps established players on their toes. Young players are so excited to get that first start for the first team. that they're going to probably work harder than some of your established pros. And they show you what holes you're missing in the first team. Because if you have an academy player that can come into the first team and take a starting spot, I need to keep an eye on that. So if that player is not fully ready to play 30 something games a season, I might need to get a replacement. Burnley aren't doing that. So with them, the whole squad is aging out, and only McNeil is going to be left to carry the entire rebuild. Moving on to the transfer budget. In January of 2021, Sean Dyche spoke on this, and Burnley's new owner, Alan Pace, has said that the aim is not to go too much further past the previous budget, but to give Sean Dyche a little bit more leeway so that he can keep the club competitive. Pace also admitted that he understood the frustrations Dyche had with the lack of budget, and that he was looking to change that. And since Burnley were falling behind the rest of the league, he wanted to give him a little bit more resources and transfer budget to keep the squad fresh. In the 2020-21 season, in the summer and winter window, Burnley spent a grand total of £990,000, not even £1 million. And it's not like they just brought in a few players. Burnley brought in 5 players for £990,000 and got rid of 5 players for nothing. Free transfers. Seasons like this just can't be happening, because there's no wonder Burnley are declining. They aren't adding any real quality to the squad, and then they're letting players who could bring in money go for nothing, not bringing in any revenue. And for a sporting director, I can't imagine how hard it is to rejuvenate the academy, add more talent onto what is probably still a shoestring budget, lower the squad age to keep players in the squad at their peak for longer, whilst trying to keep the club competitive enough to stave off relegation. I think this is one of the hardest clubs in the league to develop for the future, and it'll probably be really interesting to see what happens there. So next up is Crystal Palace, who are the only team in the league that are older than Burnley. So in 2010, a group of wealthy fans called the CPFC 2010, led by Steve Parish, bought the club, and with Parish installing himself as chairman. At the time, the club was in the Championship, but under manager Ian Holloway, they were able to reach the promised land for the start of the 2013-14 season, and they've been a Premier League staple ever since. So going over their season finishes since then, Palace have finished 11th, 10th, 15th, 14th, 11th, 12th, 14th, and then 14th again this season. So those league finishes show Crystal Palace are average to below average Premier League team. They hover around that mid-table spot. I'm not even sure if results back this up, but just from personal memory, every season it feels like Palace start really well, come out firing, get a few shock results at the beginning of the year, put points up, and as soon as they know safety is guaranteed, get to that magical 40-point number. Palace just down tools and stutter until the season is over. For the last 3.5 years, Roy Hodgson has been their manager. His style of play has changed a bit, moving between a 4-3-3 and a 4-4-2, fluctuating between defensive solidity and then looking to get the best out of key player Wilfried Zaha. So their main style of play really involves them moving the ball down the left hand side through Van Aanholt, Zaha and Eze, and creating opportunities around the box through them, or playing longer passes into target man Christian Benteke and building off the second balls. But that will change next year because Hodgson has decided to leave the club, but as of current, Crystal Palace don't have a manager, so we don't know what's going to happen next season. Everyone knows who their main man is. Probably one of the best players to ever play with Crystal Palace, wide forward Wilfried Zaha. Now Zaha is a good Premier League player. Zaha is a very good Premier League player. Very direct, highly exceptional dribbler, which means he can break down defences and he makes chances either for himself or for Benteke. 11 goals this season, which is his highest Premier League tally ever, on a team which is based on defensive solidity, is quite good. Striker Christian Benteke has also been affected this season, coming off his best scoring season since his Aston Villa days, and he's just signed a new contract, so Palace fans don't have to worry about getting a new striker right now. Other key starlet for the club is Eberiche Eze, who's just finished his debut season in the Premier League. Unfortunately, the creative midfielder suffered a serious Achilles injury which might rule him out until early 2022, which is kind of a big shame because he showed real quality in his 29 games this season, and he's probably one of those ones to watch for the future. Similarly to Burnley, Palace's key issues are their squad age and over-reliance on aging players, as well as the long-term saga of Zaha wanting to leave the club. So let's take a deeper look into the squad. Crystal Palace currently have 6 players under 24. And after that, every other squad member is over 28. Of the 11 players used in Palace's most common team, only Eze is under 28. And to make matters worse, of the 10 left, 6 of those are over 30. I just cannot believe that Burnley and Palace have allowed such an unsustainable way to build a squad to keep going for so long. It does seem that Palace are looking to make changes with this, bringing in players like Tariq Mitchell, Nathan Ferguson and Jean-Philippe Mateta. But the fact that the main starting 11 is so old means that Palace will need to sign and develop an entire new 11 at the same time, which is virtually impossible. And funnily enough, that rebuild may need to happen this summer, as 22 players have been publicly released by Crystal Palace. 22 players of a squad is absolutely crazy, with only Christian Benteke having penned a new 2-year deal. And yes, I understand that it's likely the club will end up retaining some of those players by the end of the window, but to put yourself in a position where you might lose 22 players and have such a thin squad is absolutely ridiculous. What is to stop any of those new players leveraging the thin squad for better wages or a more lucrative contract? And Palace, not like Palace can say no, because every other team that they're going to try and buy players from will understand they're in such a tight situation, they'll raise the prices. Why wouldn't you? To put yourself in a position like this is just difficult, on top of needing to find a new manager. Palace should have been looking to age out members of this squad at least 2 years ago. And now with Eze's injury, their big rebuilding hope, the person they need to rebuild around, has been set back for 9 months. And hopefully he comes back at the level he was at. But if it doesn't work out, what Palace going to do? Instead of signing Eze and using him to take pressure off Zaha, his injury and most of the squad being released means that Zaha's going to have to do even more for the team, and he doesn't even want to be there. Reportedly, Wilfried Zaha has told Crystal Palace again, for what's probably the 3rd summer in a row, that he doesn't want to be there and that he's looking to be sold. Last season it was Arsenal, or maybe that was even the year before, I'm not sure, but Zaha's been doing this for a while. And whilst I can understand the frustration of a player like Zaha playing on a team where his best attacking partner for years has been a misfiring Christian Benteke, my sympathies are also kind of low since he signed a contract that extended into 2023 and with no release clause. And because of how pivotal he is to Palace's entire attack, I'm not surprised the club value him at around £80 million, because he's probably worth that to them. He might not be worth that to anybody else in the league, but losing Zaha would be the equivalent of like Man United losing Bruno or Liverpool losing Mo Salah. The player means more to your club than he probably would to others. This goes back to Palace's squad building. Why has it taken until 2020 with the signing of Eze to finally find another attacking player who can support Zaha's attacking game? No disrespect to any of these players, but let's be honest, Christian Benteke has been poor for Crystal Palace up until this season. Michy Batshuayi isn't favoured by any manager he plays for. Jordan Ayew isn't too bad, he's not great. Andros Townsend is amazing for one screamer a season, but that's pretty much it. Bakary Sacco, Jason Puncheon, Jeffrey Schlupp are all decent players, but not really effective at this level, or at Zaha's level. Loic Remy came and went, Adebayor was well past his prime, and Marouane Chamakh. How have the club not found another attacking threat to go with Zaha up until now? He's been there for what, 6, 7, 8 years maybe, and it's taken him this long. No wonder they're petrified that he wants to leave, because if he does leave, he'll probably take half the attack with him. Clubs should be thinking of contingencies at all times. If this guy gets injured, if that guy wants out, if something happens to him, what would we do next? I'm going to go back to them, and I'll go back to them until something changes. If Manchester City lost Kevin De Bruyne today, if he decided he didn't want to play, City are in a position to let him go without scrambling for cover. Yes, they got a lot of resources, but how many clubs would be able to say, okay, we lose him, we got a plan, we can put Bernardo Silva in there, or we can play Gundogan, or Phil Foden, we can put him in. But even if you don't want to go that high level, Aston Villa decided to take the pressure off Jack Grealish in case he left for Tottenham, or in case he forced his way out. They bought Bertrand Traore and Ollie Watkins, so that if Grealish was to leave, there's still competent attacking players at the club who are able to do the job of him. If Wilfried Zaha was to miss the entire of next season, do you think Palace would be safe? And yeah, of course, losing your best player is tough, but if he left, I would genuinely think Palace would probably go down with ease. Which just makes the whole Coronation Street EastEnders storyline between Zaha and Palace even more annoying, because both sides are justified. Zaha is probably sick and tired of playing with players he doesn't believe are at his level, and he feels like he's probably carried the club as far as he could, and he wants to leave to go and be effective while he's still in his prime, because a player that uses his agility and speed a lot in his game is looking at getting the most out of that before that starts dwindling down. Whereas Crystal Palace are thinking, you signed an extension here. You signed an extension with no release clause. Why on earth would we let you leave? Imagine being a sporting director walking into Selhurst Park, and you have the possibility of having to rebuild an entire squad because most of the first team has been allowed to walk. Your best player again has publicly said he wants to leave. Your most promising player is dealing with a serious injury and could miss half of next season. This is probably the hardest job in the league, because if any of that rebuild goes wrong, if all the new players don't gel well, if Palace aren't able to re-sign some of that 22 to have first team experience, if Zaha wants out, refuses to play, gets injured, whatever, if other teams raise prices of their players because they know Palace are desperate for a squad, if the new manager turns out to be a bust, which is just underrated, the fact that you had Roy Hodgson for so long, someone who's a steady Eddie, if the new manager is bad, if any of those things go wrong, Crystal Palace will be a serious relegation candidate. And I'm not sure how many clubs have been able to do such a big rebuild from top to bottom, from a manager and squad. How many have been able to do that whilst remaining competitive in the Premier League? Palace are in serious trouble, man. And I was going to cover Newcastle today, but I think that club is so... that'll be so interesting. I want to do that with more depth and do that with a little bit more analysis. Newcastle are a team that is... no, I won't get into it today. I'll probably do that next episode, or the next time I do a big club analysis, I'll make sure to do Newcastle. Really appreciate the listens, everyone. Appreciate the shares and the follows on the new Instagram account as well. If you haven't followed, please do at @TheUnsignedManager on Instagram. Thanks for listening to this week's episode, and I will see you guys next time.